Today we'll be ranking tanks in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. If you enjoy this, please like, comment and subscribe for more. Let's begin then. On C tier we have Protection Warriors. Now Protection Warriors unfortunately have lower survivability and less utility than other tanks. That makes them very difficult to justify in a lot of situations. However, the lack of survivability is somewhat offset by incredible mobility. You have Warbringer, which lets you charge, intercept and intervene in combat in any stance. You have Shockwave, which is an excellent con-based stun. Don't forget Heroic Throw, which gives you a good range-based threat ability. You have Vigilance, which is a really strong ability that redirects 10% of threat from a raid member to you. You also have a strong activable saves like your Last Stand and your Shield Wall, which makes the skill ceiling very high for Protection Warriors. Unfortunately, in Wrath for most players, Prot Warriors will be far from their place as the tanking kings of Classic, as they were used to be, vanilla. Other tanks are more consistent, easier to heal, and provide more overall utility. Protection Warriors get a C in the Classic Wrath of the Lich King tanking ratings. On B tier, we have Blood Death Knights. Now, Blood Death Knights are pretty good tanks in the beginning of the expansion, and you will see that in heroic dungeons and such, but let's go on with the ranking. Blood DKs are Chad magic haters with two-handed swords. Right off the gate, Blood DK will be starting out a bit weaker than other tanks because they don't have shields. But they scale very well. That's their one main advantage. They have a lot to offer in their toolkit. They can deflect spells to take reduced damage, and they have an anti-magic shield to absorb 75% of damage dealt by spells. You get plenty of strong abilities like Icebound Fortitude to reduce damage by 30%, and the passive Will of the Necropolis to reduce damage when you're low on health. And don't even think about forgetting Death Grip, which is an extremely broken ability that can be used to reposition enemies. Blood DKs do also have a very strong self-healing for tanks. That's a pretty good thing to have. Ultimately, Blood Death Knights are versatile. They're easy to keep alive and they have a solid utility. Blood Dead Knight is a B in the Wrath of the Lich King tank tier list. For A tier, we have Feral Druids. Now, Feral Druids have the highest health pool in the game by a wide margin. This makes them extremely easy to heal and it makes your raids much more consistent. Meanwhile, they have far and away from the highest damage of any tanks. You have new abilities like Berserk, which allows your Mango to hit 3 targets and even makes you immune to fear. Of course, you also have to Intervate for your mana-hungry mages, and still the only battle res in the entire game. One of the best parts about Feral Druids is that when they aren't tanking a fight, they can still pump out top 5 DPS in a raid thanks to improved abilities like their multi-target cat swipe. The big downside for a Feral Druid is that they don't have that many taunt options, so they rely heavily on misdirections from hunters to get fights started. That being said, Feral Druid is arguably the simplest and most forgiving tank in Wrath of the Lich King. Without a doubt, Feral Druids are one of the best tanks in the game, and that is why they have the A tier spot. Now, it wouldn't be that good of a tier list if we didn't have some honorable mentions, and that goes to Death Knights, of course, Unholy and Frost. Unholy DKs are actually very viable for massive ace pools. They have unbelievably high AoE threat, they're perfect for speed leveling, perfect for giant poles and dungeons. Are they fun? Absolutely, but your raids may make you respec. Meanwhile, Frost Death Knights can tank with only a few small changes to their typical spec, so they'll be incredibly common in dungeons. You can positively expect to run through all the dungeons on a Frost Death Knight. Keep in mind that Unholy and Frost Death Knights only get better with gear. We'll definitely see all 3 Death Knight specs tanking dungeons and even rage as gears scale up. Now, with the honorable mention out of the way, let's look at the best tank in the whole game. The S tier itself, Protection Paladin. Lastly, Protection Paladin is the best tank in Wrath of the Lich King Classic, above even the Feral Druid. Protection Paladins are the absolute monster tanks of Wrath of the Lich King. Imagine the damage and threat of a TBC Paladin with more utility, more taunts, and more survivability. Wrath patches up practically all of your TBC weaknesses, and that's a lot. Ardent Defender reduces damage and saves you from fatal attacks. Hand of Reckoning is a perfect single target taunt, while Divine Plea gives you 25% of your total mana back every minute. Divine Sacrifice redirects 30% of party damage to the Paladin, and this is the absolute perfect ray damage mitigation ability. Meanwhile, the Shield of the Righteousness gives you more single target threat, while Hammer of the Righteous gives you even more AoE threat. Also, Avenger's Shield, my favorite spell, is an instant cast now. And let's not forget one of the most important things. This is literally the Undead expansion, so your Exorcism and Holy Wrath will pump damage and threat. Paladins are the Grand Poobahs, the Emperors of tanking in this expansion. So if you have the option, get one for your raid. You will need it, no doubt. And maybe a Feral Druid off tank or Blood Death Knight will make your raiding experience that much better. But unfortunately, you have to compete with them for damage. That happens. But what I've told you now isn't anything new. Everybody already knew and had the idea that this is how the ranking for tanking in Wrath of the Lich King works, because quite frankly, these are the only tank specs, and everybody knows their abilities and how good and useful they are. Now, the list isn't made by me. I took it from AOEAH.com, and I'll have a link to it in the description below, so you can read more of their databases and guides. Thanks for watching.